Hello and welcome to Nirmal Bang, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Hiro Dadia. We have with us Mr. Jitendra Bhargav, former ED at Air India, joining in. Welcome to the show, Mr. Bhargav, and a pleasure to speak to you and get insights from you as always. Mr. Bhargav, my first question coming to you is that the last 18 months, at least the initial few, have been a real turmoil for the aviation space, not only in India, across the globe as well. What's the sense that you pick up as to what state they were in when COVID started versus where we've reached now?
You see, let's look at it this way. When the COVID started in China, there were flights being operated. COVID infected people traveled on flights all over the world. So they acted as huge virus spreaders. So airlines had to take the blame till the governments, various governments, whether it was Indian government, US government, European governments, etc., halted flights from China first. The virus had spread. And since it was spreading at a huge pace, the governments were left with no alternative but to ground the flights. Unprecedented, because the governments had no clue on what the virus was. They were unprepared. They did not have PPE kits. The doctors did not know. They couldn't measure up the hospital requirement. They couldn't ramp up the oxygen supply and all those kind of things. So the airlines were super spreaders at one hand. On the second side, they suffered hugely once they were grounded. And it took time for them to realize the gravity of the problem, the magnitude of the problem, for example, out of the 22,000 aircraft flying in the pre-COVID era, over 14,000 aircraft were grounded. Airports had to make space for parking of aircraft. Major airports like Frankfurt, for example. And then, of course, the revival came gradually. The governments, certain governments, like the British government, the German government, the US government, extended financial aid. And the flights were gradually operating. Take India specific, for example. After being grounded on 24th of March, 2020, it was only 2 months later that the flights were allowed to operate on a limited capacity basis, with all the protocols being maintained by the airports, the airline, and the passengers, which was the redeeming part of it, commendable part of it, I would say. And then the government gradually relaxed conditions of capacity, and from 25%, 30, 35, 50%, in October 2021, government allowed 100% of the capacity to be deployed. But we are nowhere close to the pre-COVID level of passengers flying. We are still 20% down. So clearly people are being apprehensive. So it'll take time for industry to come back. There were pay cuts imposed on the employees. They're all wanting everything to be restored normalcy. But then we have the Omicron coming in. And this, I must say, is the best part of it. For the first time, we saw IATA, World Health Organization, coming out with statement within 3 days of the Omicron's emergence, that flight ban is not the solution. Because when the Omicron came up in South Africa, what did the British government do? The first thing was to ban flights. European countries followed suit. I'm not denying the fact that these two, both the UK and the European countries, were badly impacted even before the Omicron came. So their knee-jerk reaction led to that panic situation that airlines may go under punishing lockdowns once again. But because of this positive statement that came out, and they were very good statements, I would say, for the first time, the industry bodies reacted unitedly, collectively, to say, look, not much is known about Omicron. It is certainly more transmissible, but is not lethal. And we still need research to establish that it's going to affect people. So one good reason why the airline industry has not taken a major dip in December 2021, passengers have not canceled their holiday plans, is because of these applaudable statements that ICAO, IATA, World Health Organization made.
Right. So, Mr. Bhargav, overall as well, if you talk about 2021, a lot of things that happened, I mean, from a capping of capacity to capping of fares. Now, capping of capacity has gone away. Fare capping continues as of now as well. With all of that, you did have a lot of, a lot of company-related headlines where we were talking about the woes that SpiceJet was facing, the launch of Flybig, unveiling of Akasa Air, and if you talk about Air India Tatas as well. Now, taking all of this into consideration, where do you think does the aviation sector as a whole stand today?
Now, we need to look at phases that's gone on. 2021 started on a positive note as compared to 2020. So that was the redeeming part of it. People were happy that we are being able to operate. The government persisted with capacity constraints and the fare capping. Right? Now, this was something that was needed in the initial stages in May 2020, because you could not have had a scenario that you were capping the capacity, but then you were not to basically cap the fares, because there would have been dumping of capacity in the market. Some carriers saying, okay, I've got deep pockets, I'll be able to sustain it. So the fares, in a way, protected the passengers, no exploitation, but there is no rationale for the government to continue with the capping now. It should have gone away long ago. But government do have their own reasons to make it sound to the traveling public, look, we are your protectors. Allow the market to determine the fares, and that should have been done. Then, of course, as we are looking at now, with the capacity capping being withdrawn, 100% capacity allowed, and new airlines announcing flights. Akasa coming in, one. Jet Airways 2.0 announcing that it will come, but of course, it may be only in the summer of 2022 that they will be able to come. And once they come in, then you again look at the capacity. If Omicron is to affect the passenger somehow, let's not forget that while the flights have continued to operate the way they were operating in the month of November, Government of India had announced that from 15th of December, 2021, flights will be operated under the bilateral agreements as they existed in the pre-COVID era and not under the air bubble arrangement. Now, this decision was deferred till 31st of January. Now, whether it will be further extended, it's difficult to say. But if the passengers are going to remain at the growth rate at which they're growing, they grow, then you can say that, look, some airlines will get impacted when the new carriers come in, because after all, they will play with the fares to attract customers. And if they are to do that, what happens? The yields go down. The airlines will suffer more. So the rationale that you had earlier of capacity capping would suddenly find justification. Because a new airline is bound to put in at least a dozen aircraft. Because if you do not have multiple frequencies on the limited destinations on which you operate, you're not going to be economically viable. So 2022 can emerge as a difficult period for the aviation industry, with the caveat that if the Omicron impact is there. But if it is not there, for example, then there will be a boom time. People want to travel. Corporates want their businesses to grow. Economy is growing at a frenetic pace. So when you look at all these elements, why would people not travel? That's the question I would ask. Unlike the previous thing when people said travel only when it is necessary. And the fact that holidays for this Christmas, New Year this year are not being cancelled. Hotels are not reporting, airlines are not reporting. It's a clear indication that people have learned one thing. Virus is here to stay. If I can take requisite precautions, I need not fear the virus. Something that people were fearing in 2020. So the template, in a way, has been set by ICAO, ITA, and World Health Organization that don't fear, have the requisite safeguards like the government of India did. Classify countries from which it's risky for passengers to come in. And once they come in, don't ban the flights. Once they've come in, introduced stringent checks for them. Rather than take the knee-jerk reaction, oh, the fear, because of the fear, panic, passengers are going to get infected or the infection numbers will grow. Therefore, the flights must be banned. Use it as a first resort. No, don't do it. That's the big lesson that the governments have learned. And now, of course, when we look at it, whether it is Jet Airways 2.0, for them, I'm not very optimistic that they will be able to get into operation in the next few months. They haven't had a management team, the kind of infusion of funds that is needed to get back into it. So all that kind of positive image that Jet Airways, the original one, had, I think the time gap has been too long for them to take the benefit of the image that Jet Airways enjoyed. Now, when you look up the Rakesh Jhunjhunwala's promoted new airline, well, they've got into place. They've just launched their livery also. They know the management team is in place with both Vinay Dubey and Aditya Ghosh and everyone, being there. So Vian is optimistic that they will get into onto operation very soon. Now, calling it ultra low-cost airline, I don't think ultra word denotes anything significant that they'll be able to have their operating costs lower than Indigo. Because the question that we often have missed out is, why is it that of all the carriers that are operating, Indigo has remained the solitary profitable airline? SpiceJet, AirAsia from the low-cost segment. And if the low-cost airlines are not making money, most of them, there's no reason why legacy airlines will be able to be profitable.
Right.
That's an unfortunate part. And again, as I say very often, Kingfisher's collapse, Jet Airways collapse, Air India not being able to make money, Vistara not being able to make money. The problem lies in the price sensitivity of the Indian traveling public. The cost differential between the low cost and legacy carriers is far more than the fares reflect.
Absolutely. And with this, how do you see jet fuel prices impacting business? And with that, what is that other aspect that needs to change in terms of the pricing mechanism for the aviation industry to actually get on a profitable route?
You see, as of today, most airlines are having an occupancy factor of 80% plus. That is, 80% of the seats are filled on every flight on an average. So you have a limited scope of another 15-20% for the plane to be full. Now you are basically looking at is an airline selling seats at a cost which is higher than the cost of producing a seat, or is selling it less? Because if you are selling it above the cost of producing a seat, you're bound to be profitable.
Correct.
So the price sensitivity, people are looking at it. Every airline is wanting to grow their market share. In the short term, it's going to be gainful. In the long term, it's going to be harmful. How much discount can you get? And what has happened is, over a period of time, that airlines, while trying to garner market share at the cost of profitability, has made the Indian traveling public accustomed to a reign of low fares. So every time you see a ramping up of fares by the airlines, because they're selling the last few seats, media included, come up and say, look, they are being fleeced, the fares are going up. They will have media reports. Oh, Mumbai-Delhi sector is selling at 30,000 rupees or 25,000 rupees. Not saying that the airline has a system, a mechanism of revenue management, which basically is that it, unlike the railways or the road transport system, where every seat is sold at the same fare. Airlines do not do that. If you buy early, you get a cheaper fare. And it's a growth kind of a thing that when your first 50% of the seats are sold, the next 10% get at a higher fare, next 10% at a still higher fare and all. So when during festival times of Diwali, New Year, or any festival or extended weekends, you reach 85, 90, 95% load factor, the fares are bound to be higher. Because that is how the mechanism works, that how do I break even? So you have sold some seats below the cost of producing a seat. You're bound to sell many seats above the cost of producing seat to make a marginal profit or to be economically viable. So it's one, the system cannot change. The attitude of traveling public cannot change. They're looking for low fares. And airlines, in their misplaced wisdom, that it's in their interest to garner market share at the cost of profitability because it helps them in the short run. So they've forgotten that through this process, they've created an ecosystem where the moment you jack up your fares, people say, look, the growth is going to slow down, and which is the reality in the Indian market.
Right. So how long do you think will it take for the Indian aviation space to reach pre-COVID levels in terms of capacity?
You know, there are certain factors that you must look at it. Domestic airlines are almost 80%, 82% of the pre-COVID level. Now, how much can they grow? One, of course, that the 100% capacity has been deployed. New sectors have not been opened. The factor is that you got to look at the ground realities, literally ground realities. Huh? Yeah. As long as the activities on the ground do not normalize, do not expect the airline industry to have pre-COVID levels. Say at the moment when you have restrictions on the number of guests you can invite to a wedding, or people not having social gatherings or functions, or even at funerals, etc., people not flying in, they said, okay, let's not go. Or when you are looking at hospitalization, people visiting them, father, parent visiting their children, children visiting their parents, etc., has still not normalized. And these will get only normalized once you have the ground activities normalized. How often are you hearing now that the conferences and symposium are taking place? In 2021, the IPL did not take place in India. It took place in UAE. So till this gets normalized, do not expect, number one. Number two, which is an equally important factor, is till the international flights get normalized. Because when Indian nationals staying abroad, the Indian diaspora, when they come to India, what do? They also meet their relatives in different parts of India, warranting domestic travel. So their numbers also add up. And the tourism, of course, when the tourists come in, they just don't come to visit Delhi and Agra. They visit Kerala, they visit Goa and multiple cities in India. So till such time you have normalcy on the ground in various activities, film shooting become normal, sporting event become normal, sport conferences and symposium become normal. Everything has to get normalized for it to change and then get onto a growth path. So if the international flights are resumed as per bilateral rights and not under air bubble arrangements, you will have a lot of people coming to India. You see, let's look at the third factor also I can add here. There are a lot of students abroad, Indian nationals abroad working on H-1B visa. They are not being able to come to India, particularly the working class, because the visas have to be stamped at the US consulate and embassy. And US embassy and consulates are not stamping, were not stamping till this month. They've just started giving out dates from January 2022 onwards. So they have been stranded there for 2-3 years. So even after the US government relaxed the condition that said Indian nationals who are fully vaccinated can travel to United States, there are a lot of people who don't have the visas now because the US consulate has not been able to provide visas. I'm only giving US as a So this traffic which has been held up and not been able to come will only come when the visa issues also become normal. So you see the multiplicity of factors. One can hope for the normalcy to return to the pre-COVID level, but then there are factors which can't be overlooked.
Right. So with all of this, what's your sense? Do you think 2022 will possibly be a good year if everything falls in place with regards to COVID? We don't see any further waves. Do you think it'll be a good year, number one? And two, with the kind of competition kicking in, how big a rejig could we see in terms of the market share of each players?
One has to look at it and say, look, 2021 was better than 2020. Not as good as 2019. 2022, multiplicity of factors. As I said, the best part is the traveling public has learned to live with the virus by taking requisite safeguards. Airlines are operating flights. But if the perception is not allowed to be deteriorated through panic media reporting and saying, okay, this is an isolated case and look at it, somebody has very rightly said, don't talk of cases of Omicron. Talk of number of hospitalization. So, people are being educated and said, look, I will not panic, I will not fear, and I will keep traveling. One. Airlines will continue. The aircraft intake deliveries being promised by the Boeing and Airbus, for example, I'll take deliveries because now I'm allowed to operate 100% of my capacity. International flights being resumed. As I said earlier, the visa issues, etc., all get resolved. And then people say, look, I will get normal, though I do not foresee that by 2022, normalcy is on the anvil. Near normalcy, not normalcy. You recently had a case on a cruise, 40 people being infected. So people who travel from India to various parts of the world from where the cruises get operated will also not take the bookings. So, if we get into very deeply into all those things, then you really see the reasons why it is. But then there is a factor that people are revenge travel, as people have started calling it, that because I've not traveled for the last 2 years, I must travel. But even if you take that factor into consideration, you still have people who are not traveling, particularly in the higher age group. People, and as we said, Government of India is doing a good part in ensuring that everybody gets fully vaccinated, but people still not forthcoming. Now, if they have, which is because of whether they are fearing the vaccine or they don't think they need it, etc., somebody has to understand the psyche of the people. And I'm very clear about it. People who are traveling will travel. People who have the fear will probably look for normalcy, but once they realize that normalcy is not on the anvil. People in 2020 felt that, look, 2021 has become much better. Many people started traveling. 2022, more people will start traveling. So, and the competition would much depend on this. Because if you dump capacity into the market with the new aircraft delivery being taken, will you be able to operate flights at 80-85% load factor? On one side, which is essential because our fares are lower than the rest of the world. The costs have been going up. As we all know, the ATF prices have risen phenomenally. Of course, that's a big cost factor and people do not appreciate it. Our parliamentarians raise a hue and cry, the fares are going up and all those things. So an ecosystem has also to be managed. But airlines will have to regulate the capacity. The government may have withdrawn the capacity capping, but airlines will have to ensure, as a collective body, I'm not dumping capacity in the market, leading to forced fare reductions and therefore losses for the airlines.
Absolutely.
But one can be optimistic and somebody can be pessimistic. I'm taking the middle ground that, look, I know 2022 will be better than 2021. But to say that we will attain normalcy levels, pre-COVID level, and be on a growth pattern, really we may have to wait for another 1 year.
Absolutely. And that's something which we need to wait and watch as well. Thank you, Mr. Bhargav, so much for joining us on the show. As always, it's a pleasure to speak to you, get insights from you and understand, what the sector is actually looking at. Thank you so much. Speak to you soon again and stay safe.
Thank you.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel for in-depth interviews of India Inc. and press the bell icon so that you do not miss our updates.